Welcome back to the New Quantum Era. I'm your host, Sebastian Hassinger. Today, I'm talking with someone who sits right at the intersection of quantum science, engineering, and academic leadership. Professor Nadya Mason, Dean of the Pritzker School of Molecular Engineering at the University of Chicago. Nadya's path is anything but linear. She started as an elite gymnast, heading for the Olympics with what she describes as a very weak math and science background. And then she fought her way into physics and fell in love with condensed matter physics and went on to do foundational work in superconductivity, quantum dots, and hybrid devices that underpin much of today's quantum hardware. In this conversation, we get into why materials and the interfaces of materials are the real bottlenecks for quantum technologies, and how she thinks about the shift from what she calls quantum 1.0 to quantum 2.0, and what it actually looks like to build a regional quantum ecosystem around Chicago and the surrounding area that connects universities, national labs, companies, and state government. But the thread that runs through all of this is Nadya's view of leadership, which I really found inspiring. For her, being dean isn't about accumulating power, especially in a world where, as she puts it, faculty don't work for me. It's about service. She's serving her community, building a community around science, expanding access to research experiences, and making sure the next generation has the math skills and hands-on opportunities they need to participate in the quantum future. I really hope you enjoy this wide-ranging conversation with Professor Nadya Mason.
Hi, Nadya. Thank you very much for joining me today. I'm really excited about this conversation. We met at the APS Summit last March. It was a lovely conversation. And at that point, I was like, I've got to get Nadya on. So can you start by telling me a bit about your personal journey, how you got to where you are today?
Sure. And I'll start by saying, Sebastian, it's just a pleasure to be here. So thank you. Thank you for having me on the show. I started as a high school student with a very weak math and science background.
Nice.
I actually did a lot
I
of
can
sports.
relate.
You can relate to it, right? I mean, I was a pretty serious athlete. I was an elite gymnast. I was trying to make the Olympics. I was on the national team, didn't make the Olympics. I quit right before my junior year of high school, and then tried to catch up all of my academics in 2 years. So with that background, I had a summer internship. I realized I liked experimental science. I didn't even know it was a career that you could work with your hands and play in the lab. I liked every time I heard about physics, not from class, but outside, I liked thinking about the world in physics ways. And when I got to college, I took a bunch of classes in many different areas, realized that physics explained the world in a way that I could relate to, with a mathematical basis, with actual, rational step-by-step understanding of how the world worked for my very ordered mind in some sense. And so I decided to be a physics major, which is, this is the first step toward quantum. I like thinking about it. I like to understand the world that way. And it wasn't necessarily. I was far behind my peers in terms of coursework and in terms of understanding, and had to do a lot of work to catch up, which was not the fun part, the problem
Right.
set and other things. But the great thing about it, and the reason I start with that when I talk about my journey, is that I've always felt like I'm in it because I really like thinking about it, and I like looking at the world and feeling like, a rainbow is more beautiful because I understand diffraction. That's incredible, right? That's beautiful from every aspect now, not just aesthetically, but also in terms of just how the fundamental physical principles of the world work. So that's what's really propelled me throughout my career. So I majored in physics in undergraduate. Wasn't really sure what areas I wanted to do. I had the good fortune of having several internships at AT&T Bell Labs back when they were still a really prominent research lab, especially with their amazing history in developing technologies, physical sciences. And there got turned on to condensed matter physics, which is really table tabletop. You can control the way that you do things, get this level, again, the control of understanding things. And also just thinking about molecules working together, about how you can go from the microscopic to the macroscopic and understand, by understanding from microscopic principles, you can understand things macroscopically. And by the way, if you do solid state or condensed matter physics, it can even be useful, right? And it's fun doing it. So that combination for me is what really propelled me into physics, into condensed matter physics. I went to graduate school, studied superconductors. Great example of microscopic to macroscopic understanding. You have just individual electrons that we think about as just turning on light switches, right? In my mind before, it's like an electron moves through a wire from one side to the other and the light goes on. But, it's actually much more complicated in terms of quantum principles of how they work. And, you cool down most material, the electrons pair up, they form a state that flows with no electrical resistance. It's really this macroscopically incredible quantum state that is apparent almost everywhere. And to me, that was just really, really exciting. So that is what I've continued to study throughout my career and work in, and it turns out is one of the fundamental building blocks of a lot of quantum computing and thoughts about quantum, as the recent Nobel Prize showed, in fact. So
yes.
Yeah. So anyway, so that was my journey from high school through at least studying physics and thinking about things quantum.
And was there a point at which you got more interested in sort of the administrative side of things, the leadership side of things? Because, as dean now, you're in a very powerful position, a very powerful institution. The Pritzker School of Molecular Engineering at UChicago is, preeminent. It's among the best in the world. It's it doesn't feel like something you just sort of accidentally become the dean of, right?
That is correct. Yeah, that's correct. And I should mention that, I'm only the second dean. We're a relatively young school, and so the first dean was sort of the startup phase, and I feel like I'm in the building, which is one of the reasons I went to UChicago, to really help maintain that level of excellence and build, especially in areas like quantum. So to answer your question, I did not start as physics faculty thinking I wanted to do academic administration. I would say probably no one does, and if they do, they probably shouldn't be physics faculty.
Right.
I hate to say it.
Right. The love of the science and the love of the teaching has to come first, right?
That's exactly right. Academia is a beautiful place where we can really explore ideas and develop technologies, and really explore and develop fundamental knowledge. It is has been one of the few places on Earth that we can still do that, and you can see the results of that in how the world has developed technologically. So yes, I absolutely was there for the love of the science, for the love of teaching, for being in an intellectual environment that really furthered the field. Within, I'd say, but I will say, also care about sharing the field of physics. So to me, I'm working for the love of it, but I really believe in giving back. That's just fundamental to what I think is important in my values. And being a physicist, giving back in terms of sharing the things that I care about and I love, which is knowledge of physics, which is opportunity to study physics, which is making sure that people have the chance to explore, understand, and contribute to the field if they want to. And that they're given those opportunities, they're not prevented from it by the wrong reasons, because they had a bad class or they didn't, no one thought that they would be good at it. So that's been something that really from the beginning has been important to me, in terms of both outreach to communities, in terms of making sure that I can help with mentoring programs. I had the fortune to help start a mentoring program at the American Physical Society. And then also through leadership, so it turns out that what I realized in, my first really big leadership opportunity was running a materials research center at University of Illinois, where I was formerly faculty with a MERSEC. It's a big, and what's great about it is the MERSEC combines research with outreach, with education. It really creates this community around the science, with the understanding that you're not isolated in your science. It's the world around you that learns from it, that you contribute to, that it's translated to the outside world. And this is about 25 faculty, maybe 100 students and other people. But I really enjoyed being able to build a community around science, and in this case, around science that I cared about particularly, and that's what leadership was to me, thinking about what do people want, what can further the field, what can further education. And I hate to say, I also had I've had a lot of top-down input into things, which is, amazing seeing, I think mentoring is really important. We started a mentoring program there. That's very gratifying. So that's what gave me a real taste for academic
It
leadership.
sounds like the almost the service model of leadership, right? Is leader as a way to give back to and to build community rather than to accumulate personal power as it is for some people.
Well, that's what motivates me. And, once again, going through
It's
academia,
beautiful.
if you want to accumulate power, this may not be the best place because let me tell you, the faculty do not work for me.
Right.
I am nobody's
Right.
boss, it turns out.
Right.
So,
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, and I was going to mention UIUC. It's such another incredible institution, and I've worked a bunch with people at the HQAN Center at UIUC and other places. So it's another great university to be affiliated with. So okay, so you mentioned actually one question on your own personal journey. You mentioned superconducting being incredibly important in certain elements of quantum computing. Was there a point in time in your either your graduate work or your postgraduate work that you sort of intersected, quantum information and technology as a sort of quantum computation as a topic?
Yeah, my own personal research was a little bit more fundamental in terms of at hybrid superconducting devices. So looking at what happens when you connect superconductors to other materials. This is interesting in terms of, at least in the early days of superconductors, just power lines and other places where you'd want, especially high density power lines and things where you want to decrease the amount of power lost to heat, which can be tremendous. Um, and if you do that, you have to connect to other materials, right? You have to think about how does superconductors connect to other materials. I was also thinking about these superconducting junctions, which is how do you maintain superconductivity across normal metals and other things. This is the basic element of a superconducting qubit. So, even at the time as I'm working on these, superconducting qubit is a superconductor, normal metal superconductor sandwich or superconductor insulator superconductor sandwich where you maintain coherence across the superconducting islands. And, that by controlling that coherence, controlling the connection across there, you basically control the qubit. And so that, so the intellectual basis of that was very interesting to me. How do you maintain coherence? What materials allow you to do that? What exotic materials can you make junctions with? And one of our early experiments had to do with connecting superconductors to graphene. And what we discovered was these bound states that were created in the graphene called Andreev bound states that had very distinct signatures of how you could basically how you could create superconducting coherence in a normal material, even with normal electrons, in these in between states that maintain coherence across. I mention this because a few years after this, Andreev bound states became very, very well known as related to these Majorana bound states that were relevant to topological.
I was going to bring up Majoranas. Yeah.
But this,
as soon as you start talking about semi and super, bonds together, then exactly.
So it's I mentioned that because that's a way that of trying to gain a fundamental understanding of how in a microscopic way, how do we understand electrons, coherent paired electrons in a normal metal, which doesn't have paired electrons and doesn't have that same coherence that a superconducting pair does, but can create its own type of interaction with a superconductor. Understanding that from a fundamental level, it turns out, is very, very relevant to controlling it in things like topological computing and in standard qubits. So it wasn't directly related to that, but it can form. Even at the time, I knew it was forming the basis for some of this work.
Right. And I think you also worked with Charlie Marcus for a time as well. It was on carbon nanotubes, or were there spin qubits involved as well?
There's carbon nanotubes, yeah. So I was at Harvard. I was a junior fellow at Harvard as a postdoc. And Charlie, I worked with Charlie and Mike Biersig and some others on creating a quantum dots in carbon nanotubes. The idea of semiconducting, but the idea there was making semiconducting, spin qubits out of these. the first step to that was just creating quantum dots where you could trap individual electrons to control the spin. And
That
that was a
alone is extraordinary, right? We
it
throw
was
quantum dots around. It's like, oh, it's just a quantum dot. But I remember first reading about those a number of years ago and going like, is that possible? Like, how
yeah,
can you trap a single electron in a well? It
it's
doesn't make any
amazing.
sense. Yeah, it
It's
really
amazing,
is.
and I still, when I give talks today, this is, many decades later, I still show that data, because what you see for an individual quantum dot, you see an electron that passes through a quantum dot has a spike in conductance. That's the charging energy, and actually you understand that very simply as a capacitor. You have to have some energy going from one side to the other of a capacitor plate, and if you could see that, you'd see, a surge in conductance. In this case, it's a capacitor, but where a single electron passes through, and that single electron has to reach that capacitive energy. So you see a peak in conductance every time that electron goes through. And then if you get to even colder temperatures, there's a quantized energy scale, quantum mechanics at work, that you have to pass through the quantum confinement energy, right? You confine something in a box that has, you know, we know from 100 years ago that particles have not continuous but discrete energy levels, and you can actually see those again in the same sort of conductance peak. So I still show it because I still think it's incredible
It
that you
really
can
is.
see. Um,
It really is.
yeah, yeah. It's like I also worked with Mike Tinkham, who's one of the godfathers of superconductivity, and having that combination of new mesoscopics and the fundamentals of superconductivity made it a really
It's
formative
really cool.
experiment.
It's amazing to me how crucial materials and condensed matter physics are to this stage of quantum computing. Many of the challenges that we face for, on the path to fault tolerance and scale
Yeah,
have material questions at the core of them, right? Even
that's
things
right.
like transduction from a microwave, an RF qubit to or a superconducting qubit signaled by RF to a photonic qubit.
Yeah,
That's primarily a materials challenge, and so many
absolutely.
other aspects are going to be, require sort of fundamental breakthroughs in our understanding of how the underlying materials work, and also solving the puzzle of like, well,
Yeah,
we need something and we'll do X. How,
yeah,
we're gonna have to come up with a material that meets those
yeah,
requirements in a way. There's this
yeah,
interesting boundary of like, basic science and applied sort of technological research that I
yeah.
find really fascinating at this
Yeah.
stage.
Yeah, that's exactly right, and, we've all heard the saying, "The devil is in the details," and, in condensed matter physics, we say the devil is in the material, and the devil is in the interfaces, right? It's not sometimes we can make one material as beautiful as possible, you put them together and there's schmutz between them, right? And you can't get rid of it, and, you can't tell me how many experiments
Is
have
that a
failed.
technical term, the
And
schmutz?
absolutely, schmutz, that's what we call it, and you try to ignore it and it doesn't go away, it's terrible. Yeah, as you can tell, I grew up in New York, so that's my
Yeah.
I can throw in a few of those. Um, but yeah, so, I can tell I can tell you how many experiments have been ruined because in the summer, the humidity is higher, and if you have a really small sample and it gets a layer of water in between two elements, your physics is totally changed. And, you have to know to control for everything like that, and that's hard because if you wanna be reproducible, which you have to be, and you wanna make practical things that can be translated, which you have to at some point, you've gotta control everything.
Yeah, 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 and that's the extraordinary thing. I mean, back to the quantum dot thing and many other things that we're actually experimenting with is it's the level of control that we're exerting now. It's engineering at a scale
Yeah,
that is the realm of quantum mechanics rather than
absolutely.
you mentioned Bell Labs the quantum effect that allows semiconductors to work the way they do and classical chips to work the way they do is, so far below the surface of what we actually engineer chips at. And we're with quantum, we're actually at that level
Yeah,
directly. I
yeah,
just
no,
find that.
that's exactly right, and, I have to throw in a little bit about we talked about leadership, and we talked about you mentioned engineering, and I have to say a little bit about the Pritzker School of Molecular Engineering
Yes,
or,
please. I was
UChicago
about to
PME
shift to that. Yeah.
oh, good, okay, that's well, because, it is, I will say University of Illinois physics was in the School of Engineering, which I really valued because I see the very deep connections from John Bardeen on up between physics and all the other areas of engineering. At PME, it's a new school that started just 15 years ago, and so there's an opportunity to start from the ground up and think about what does modern science and engineering look like? It's not science only. It's not engineering only. It's not physics only. It's not electrical. It's combined, and that's how we move forward. Is by thinking about topics that are important. In this case, we have a whole theme on quantum science and engineering, and then bringing in people from material science, from electrical, from physics to build this area together and really think about what's needed to fill gaps both fundamentally and in terms of connecting to translation. This is again, for me, talk about leadership. This is why I chose to be in this environment. I wasn't honestly wasn't thinking about being dean at the point that I left, but being dean of a school that is really different and unique and is thinking differently about an education and how to do it in the way that has the most impact, right? And create the community that has the most impact was something that was very appealing to me. Um, and, and the people there have all bought in. This is maybe we're still new, so people come because they want to, and they but which is true everywhere. But it's different. But especially for an area like quantum, and I mentioned it, having from the ground up this level of integration between fields and between external partners and companies and industry and engineering as well as science has been really powerful for us.
That brings me to the next topic, which is Chicago Quantum Exchange and
Yes.
the extraordinary investment that the state has made and now the region is making. I just talked to Alejandra Castillo from Indiana just yesterday, actually. So that'll be an episode around the same time as yours. But there's this great surge of public investment in Illinois and the area. How do you what's the role of UChicago PME in that partnership and that ecosystem
Yeah.
development?
Yeah. I feel very fortunate to live in a state where the governor considers himself a quantum governor. Not that he's in a super position, but that he
I know.
supports
What
quantum.
does that mean?
Well, he's all over the place.
Okay,
but,
support. Got it.
yeah. That we, when we developed this theme 15 years ago as something that would build on strengths that we had. Very soon thereafter, the Chicago Quantum Exchange was started in collaboration with the University of Illinois with Argonne National Lab. Illinois has 2 national labs that are very, very strong in these areas, and with very strong support from the governor to invest in joint buildings and in space and in the research that would enable quantum, because he really believed that quantum would be the next technological revolution. So having that as an underlying motivation of, okay, you guys get together and figure this out, I'm going to support you, has been incredibly powerful. And
So
doing
smart,
it
too.
15 years
Yeah.
ago.
I know.
This is when, the University of Chicago invested in PME. That's hiring 15 faculty over this space just in quantum. That's really huge. That's $1 billion
It's
investment
extraordinary.
in Chicago, right?
One of the first things I did when I joined IBM Quantum was helping the whole process of IBM joining the Chicago Quantum Exchange, which was
Yeah.
at that point wasn't even a legal entity. It was just a loose
Yeah.
affiliation of 5
Yeah.
universities.
Yeah.
And right from that point, I could see there was, it was an instance of skating to where the puck is going to
Yeah.
be. Like it was very, very
Yeah.
insightful, I think, and
Yeah.
incredibly smart move. Very, very
Yeah.
smart move. And it's positioned the state really, really well at this point.
Incredibly well. I want to give, a shout out to David Aushalom, who was, one of the very first hires in PME. Matt Terrell, our former dean,
And
brought him.
Kate Timmerman's done an incredible job on the
Kate, the
administrative side.
CEO,
Yeah.
has done an incredible job. And so they have built up Chicago. They had the vision. And really, I will say one of the first visions in the country. I'm just, I'm not just looking around at the time of building quantum through collaborations with industry, with education and workforce development, and with academia and with federal and state support, and using that ecosystem development to make sure that we were training people in the right way, that we knew the right problems to work on with research, that companies were coming, that we were integrated with what was needed and what's just new and coming up from the ground up in the field, that all of that was one tight circle that we could build on in the future. And it's just come to fruition because now we have, 50 companies that are part of Chicago Quantum Exchange. It has, it's Purdue, Wisconsin, University of Illinois, Argonne, Fermilab, University of Chicago, the governor recently announced the Illinois Quantum and Microelectronics Park. That's another $500 million state investment in super exciting. DARPA's partnering there, and the idea is again to build up the quantum research. No, you know, quantum is there's many people in the country who are trying to do this now. We were among the first, and we're trying to build to make our most attractive. And I do recognize, of course, it's good for lots of people to be. Competition is not a bad thing. It's good for all of us to build together, to try to build, to have a little competition plus collaboration even across different states, different entities. It's good for competitiveness in the US, which is important, but it's also good for quantum. It's a young field. There's fundamental knowledge gaps there at the same time that people are trying to scale and having, billion-dollar valuations on NASDAQ. So it's a really unique place right now where I'd be interested to hear what you think. If someone asked me 20 years ago, when is quantum going to be a viable technology? I would have said, between 20 and 100 years, which means I'm not thinking, who knows, right?
Well, it depends on how you define the question, right? The terms of the question are the real variables, because in some ways, as we were saying, there's the depth of knowledge that we're building around the fundamentals is having constructive impact today. In some ways, ASML's, lithography devices that TSMC uses to make 2-nanometer chips, that's engineering at nearly a quantum scale in and of itself, right? Even if it's not,
it is.
For them, it's a matter of controlling the quantumness to keep it,
that's right.
out of the way.
That's right.
But it's, I think that the impact is much broader than people generally imagine. They think about it in terms of, Shor's algorithm. When can we run, crack RSA or whatever? And that's a milestone, but there's all kinds of other effects. So, I think that it's having an impact right now.
Sure.
And just the way you described it as can you remember, this in recent times, this level of investment in basic research in physics, and the reason, that the driver is that people see that there's impact, practical impact. It's not just the ivory tower academic kind of pursuit of knowledge, as much as I think that's should be enough to drive the investment, but it isn't. The real world wants, practical impact. And I think that there's, that practical impact is almost starting today, if anything, right? And that's terrific.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's exciting.
Yeah, and I want to, I think that it's important sometimes. I don't like confusing people, because when you say quantum, not you, but it's kind of general audience, kids, when you talk about quantum and we say, oh, the quantum revolution is starting now. Okay, let's differentiate quantum mechanics and that fundamental principles of quantum revolution, which started 100 years ago, right? And that's just this idea of you have quantized energy states. Things aren't continuous. You can split atoms apart based on the energy states that you have. That's the basis for nuclear energy. Other things also, but I'm going to talk about nuclear energy, right? It's the idea of entanglement and superposition, the idea of quantum tunneling, that you can go through barriers that are larger than you could go through otherwise, like going through a wall for a particle. These are ideas that were developed 100 years ago, and they've led to modern transistors, to GPS, to nuclear power, to lasers, right? To every integrated completely into society that technologies rely on. That's quantum 1.0, right? Now the past.
By the way, not to interrupt, but there's a reason why the podcast is called the new quantum era.
Exactly. I love it. No, I love that. That's exactly right. So I don't want to call it the old quantum era, because it's still, quantum 1.0 is still relevant.
The first quantum era, right? And now that's the new one.
The new quantum era, quantum 2.0, is using quantum systems for information, right? And I mean, that's really a specific thing. It's that can we use them to gather information? That might be quantum sensing. Can we use them to transmit information? Maybe quantum networking. Can we use them to manipulate information? Quantum computing. I'm being simplistic about it, but that is a really different way of thinking about it. And this is using these same principles of superposition, of entanglement, same things as superconductors, which have been known for over 100 years, but now using it to manipulate the information encoded in the quantum system. That's new. That's really new, and that could open up worlds in the same way that lasers and MRIs and nuclear energy opened up worlds for us because we're still not completely able to manipulate that information, but we will get there, and we'll get there in 5 years or so. I think quantum sensing, picking up information with these quantum states, that's ready. That's really engineering the technology, and who knows what that's gonna do for medicine and biology. Quantum computing, it is this close to being error-corrected useful, and we don't know what's gonna happen, but I really so versus 20 years ago, I'm a convert now. I really think that it's the new quantum era is fundamentally different from what we saw before and has grown by leaps and bounds in terms of technological development and capabilities beyond what I would have expected as a quantum physicist, and is has some potential applications that we know about. Like I said, quantum sensing for picking up, looking inside of cells and individual ion channels, quantum computing algorithms for the Haber reaction in agriculture. We talk about this a lot, it's for optimization and stuff, but also for things that we don't know. I mean, who would anticipate the laser? I'm sorry, anticipate the laser. Who would anticipate laser surgery for eyes? You know?
Yeah. I always love to give the example of Stan Ulam from the Institute of Advanced Studies in, I think, 1948, came up with the Monte Carlo algorithm for neutron diffusion calculations. So it was a physics problem he was trying to solve with limited computational power. It worked for him. And it wasn't until 30 years later that somebody looked at a financial portfolio and thought, right? So that's the kind of thing that I think, we get to these devices that can't be simulated classically, like 50 plus connected logical qubits. And what scientists are going to start doing with them to simulate many body systems, the techniques they develop for that experimentation is going to be the sort of where we can harvest these unintended, expanded sort of usefulness out of those techniques, right? I mean, algorithms very rarely, other than Peter Shor and a few others, algorithms don't usually emerge from theory. They emerge from techniques and heuristics, and then eventually are proven to be theoretically the most efficient or whatever, right? I mean,
That's right.
yeah. So that's what I'm super excited about is how the devices and the technologies we're developing are the building blocks for things that we don't know we're going to come up with.
That's absolutely right. And I went to a talk by Peter Shor at Argonne a few weeks ago. It was an excellent talk. And one of the things he pointed out was that what limited it, what limited use of his algorithm was not the quantum computers. It was the classical computers. We didn't have enough classical computing power to do even basic tests of any quantum algorithms until the past couple decades. And so sometimes it's, and when we think about why aren't there useful quantum algorithms now? There's a whole, this is also part of the theoretical engineering of things. It's not as simple, just like you just said, it's not as simple as just saying, I made up this thing, let's put it to work. It's, are the conditions right? Do you understand the needs? Do you understand the computing system? Do you have the rest of the hardware that couples to it? And it has to be a convergence of technologies. And we're at the cusp of that. Right, that's where we are now. But the reason that it takes time is you have to get to. It takes 30 years to get to the point where you can converge those technologies, and then when it happens, it's boom.
It looks obvious after the fact.
It looks obvious after the fact, and everyone thought, "Oh my, how'd we get here?" Like AI, how'd we get here? Well, people have been working at it.
And since the 50s.
It converged, and that's like the convergence that seems like that sudden wow factor. And there's so much work behind it, and we're all doing it all the time, and it's exciting.
It's so exciting. So okay, we're getting near sort of time, but I wanted to make sure that we circle back to something you said before, where you said that you wanted to, part of your idea of leadership, your service model of leadership was making sure people didn't get denied access to the educational resources and opportunities. This does feel, one of the things that's exciting about this moment in quantum is that it's a chance to do it over again, right? It's a new paradigm of computation that's going to drive and communication that's going to drive the development of a new industry. And science and technology do not have a great track record with making sure that there's equitable access to the resources. So is there are there things that either UChicago and PME within UChicago can do directly, or are there things that are more broadly owned by the Chicago Quantum Exchange,
Yeah,
the regional development, or even at a federal level, or all of the
yeah,
above? What do you
yeah.
think we need to be doing to
All
make
of the above.
sure? Yeah, I figured.
All of the above. Yeah. So I
It was
mean,
a leading question.
leading question. Yeah, I mean, so UChicago PME, we have the Open Quantum Initiative that brings undergraduates into quantum labs, into multiple quantum labs, and visit industry to see the ecosystem. We have, like many universities, research experience for undergraduates. We have middle school programs. We started something called the Southside Science Fair, in collaboration with physical sciences at UChicago, which is now bringing 4,000 kids to our quads to learn about science fundamentally, including about quantum. These are all things that matter. And I will say from my personal experience, it is most important. The two most important things, this is me talking, is math skills from a young age and research experience. If you can get kids to understand that math is a tool and it's not hard from the get-go, it's something that's just a tool like learning a language. And if you can get anyone into a lab, into a computer lab, a research lab, any sort of lab, those two things give people a taste for the key parts of science and engineering, right? The fundamental tools, the language necessary, and then the experience of problem solving. Because when I think about quantum training, we don't know, we've just discussed, we don't know where this is going to go in the next 10 years. The elementaries, the middle school, even the high school kids of today, I want to train them to have the tools and to problem solve. And then they're gonna be great, right? And then also to learn about it, make sure it's integrated, they hear about these things, that's part of what we were talking about, the opportunity. Do you even know it exists, right? Is someone coming to your school, whether it's in the south side of Chicago or anywhere else, has anyone mentioned this term before so that you're not shocked and you don't think that your only option is being a lawyer or a doctor or anything else? Not that lawyering or doctoring are bad, but, I want quantum physicists to be up there with, these are my choices. I can make clear choices based on my interest, knowledge, and skills. And that involves having some of those fundamental skills, getting some of that hands-on experience, and then deciding what works best. So we work at that. I would love to see that pushed more at the federal level as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Because we need these
Well,
kids. We need these problem solvers.
yeah, yeah. Q12, the NSF funded effort that was started by, I believe it was started by Emily Edwards from UIUC and Diana Franklin from UChicago initially. And there are other people who have been involved as well, but I've been involved with it since the beginning when I was at IBM and then AWS. One of the things that was really apparent is that in the U.S., the biggest stumbling block educationally is that the states determine their own curricula. And so the federal level has limited ability to drive curricula change and resource availability. So Q12 is sort of an over-the-top effort to provide resources for teachers and parents. But I wonder if Illinois is, also going to take a leadership role in this sort of full spectrum of, starting with the earliest kind of exposure to scientific tools and experiences, as you said. Is that, is that something that the PME or UChicago are in a position to influence, I guess?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I will say that I've not personally had conversations about education at the state level because, as you know, there's um, a lot of politics involved with teachers and curricula and all of these things. What we try to do is through things like what the Emilys are doing is try to have materials available so that the teachers who are interested in this have the capability to introduce this into their classroom and work from the ground up as teachers advocate for it. Um, and it becomes integrated more as opposed to a top down, you have to have this in your schools right now. Um, and then, like I said, the other part of ground up is making sure that we expose as many people as possible to these standards at the youngest point. So again, there can be advocacy for understanding it, for being ready, for being primed to do it. So, um, uh, yeah, it's a great initiative. It's an important initiative, and I think they're approaching it the right way. It would be great to have something like that on the national level. That hasn't happened yet. We were hoping that one of the national quantum initiatives would be an education-focused one. perhaps still time for that. But it would be really great to also coordinate across states. This is something that quantum, it's been stated at the highest levels, even of the current administration, that quantum is a priority. And being the world's best in quantum as a country is a priority, and getting this technology working. If we want to do that, we have to make quantum education a federal priority as well.
Right. Right. I agree. And, I mean, workforce development is in every single state's agenda for this whole spectrum of quantum science and technology. And that workforce is not going to educate itself. So.
No, and I mean, I'm curious about other people too, because almost everyone I know, I keep talking about hands-on experience because, it's one thing to go into a classroom and to talk. These are all good for exposure visibility, but the more kids we can get, and by kids, I mean high school level and below, right? Just doing something hands-on. It can be robotics. My kids did first robotics through high school. It can be working in a biochem lab. That was my first lab experience. I didn't do biochemistry, but, I learned that you can do these things for life. So just getting kids into research spaces at all ages and understanding what this is going to be amazing for our country's scientific development. And whatever it takes to get there, I would love to see a push. Integrating quantum into that, of course, but research, math.
Yeah.
Let's push that.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it feels like those are you're exactly right, and those are the universal sort of ingredients. They unlock all of the potential. It's just that research, the lab experience, and the basic tools of math for science. So as a last thought, you've just taken this role recently as dean. What's sort of your greatest hope for what you can accomplish over the next 2, 3, or whatever the planning horizon in your position?
3 to 5 years or something like that.
3 to 5 years. Yes, the classic.
The classic. Yeah. I mean, I think in our as an academic institution, our goal is to do great research, have great education, and to have the most impact from academic research. Our partnerships matter crucially for that, because I do think that to have impact in areas like quantum, we have to have partners, we have to have external areas. But my goal is to, one, grow our school. We're young, we're just 15 years old, so double in size, and to grow while maintaining the highest level of faculty, student education, and impact that we have right now. That might seem simple, but it means hiring great junior people, making sure that they're filling in holes in areas that we don't have. For example, quantum algorithms. We have some great people. That's going to grow. We want to make sure that cohort is big. Rethinking engineering education for tailoring it. I don't think that quantum, educating even undergraduates or PhD students who think about quantum, it doesn't have to be the same education that they would have gotten 30 years ago. How do we train people newly for understanding the world? To have to take 2 semesters of upper level classical mechanics like I did? I don't know, maybe not, right? So rethinking education at the and teaching and research at the highest levels to have the greatest impact, while personally growing our school and making sure that we stay as excellent as we are now. That's my personal goal. But I think that as you mentioned, I love how you started out saying how great UChicago is, because I really think it's incredible, right? How great our School of Engineering is, and just making sure that we also, my personal hope is, the reason I'm there is to contribute more broadly, right? I believe in excellence as being the baseline of impact. And as we can build up our excellence and our growth, it is to have greater impact for students, for the country, for the world. I'm technology is complicated. I'm not going to say that technology is always for the good, but I will say that technology marches forward, and it's our job to think about how to shape it for the good and what the uses are. And that's part of what we do and how we think about it. And if we don't, we'll definitely be in worse shape than if we if we pretend it doesn't exist, or we don't keep pushing forward. We will definitely fall behind and be worse than we would be otherwise. So I'm a really great believer in that, and I think that that's part of our mission as scholars, as engineers, and as institutions.
Fantastic. That's great. Thank you very much, Nadya. This has been really wonderful. I've enjoyed the conversation very much, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. It's been a great pleasure, and really enjoy your podcast. And thank you for exploring the topics that you do. They're important and interesting.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the podcast, a production of The New Quantum Era, hosted by me, Sebastian Hassinger, with theme music by OCH. You can find past episodes on www.newquantumera.com or on Blue Sky at newquantumera.com. If you enjoy the podcast, please subscribe and tell your quantum curious friends to give it a listen.